Everybody, welcome to the Voxology Podcast. Mike Erre and a slightly under the weather Tim Stafford fighting off a cold he just reported with his first cup of coffee in several days. So, yeah, you're getting a caffeinated, slightly subdued, minorly infected Tim Stafford. How was your Halloween, Tim? That's the question everyone wants to know. The highlight of your year.
We had a lot of people here.
Yep.
We trick-or-treated. We got up at 5 a.m. the next day and drove to an all-weekend soccer tournament.
I mean,
yeehaw.
It doesn't get any better.
It doesn't. I actually really enjoy the soccer tournaments.
Tell me about the tears, Tim. There were tears.
The tears? Oh, yeah, I did have tears at one point. What was it for? Oh, Mazzy, so she's been training to be a goalie. So she's the backup goalie. And so once a week she goes to a goalie training that I go to with her.
Nice.
And she had this was the state cup tournament. Their team has struggled this year. And they started the tournament out. It's so dramatic. It's crazy. I'm sure you remember it being this way probably too with Nate. But I get stressed out and so into the game I'm watching the Giants play or whatever. I'm all the parents were all so locked in.
Yeah.
In the first game, the ref shorted us about 7 minutes, and we were losing 1-0, and everybody lost their minds. And then the ref figured it out, put the minutes back up, and then they ended up tying it 1-1. So it was a very important extra couple of minutes. So they did well. They did so well. They had to play this weekend also. But Mazzy had a crazy block, smother, 3 things in a row on one play to save the goal 3 times in a 30-second period. Super aggressive on the ground, just going nuts. It was all the practice, all the work. She was aggressive and confident. It was so good. So yeah, I got a little teary. I had sunglasses on when I ran out and picked her up off the field because all the parents line up for high fives after the game.
Oh yeah.
And then I just ran straight at her, and her smile was all the way up to her ears, and she ran over, and I picked her up. So it was very good. So it's fun. It's exhausting staying in a little hotel with there's 28 fields at this tournament.
Yeah. It's death. It is the death of finances. It is the death of rejuvenation over the weekend.
Trees on these fields. It's just pure sun. And it was warm. It was it was November 1st, and it was 80 something degrees in just pure sunlight.
Now just imagine that God thinks about you and feels about you the way that you feel about Mazzy.
I hope so.
Right? I mean, how life-changing would that be?
It'd be good. I would appreciate it.
Yeah. So,
but I keep hearing that he hates me and I'm a filthy sinner.
Well, you're listening to the wrong people, my friend. Well, awesome. I'm glad Halloween was great. Seth Erre declared that he wanted to help me hand out candy. That lasted for maybe 3 minutes when there wasn't a steady parade of
Do you guys get a lot in your little neighborhood?
No, we don't.
Okay.
But we get all our neighbors. So it's great catch up time with people we haven't seen. And it's just awesome. So I pulled a fire pit out in the street and just had a bunch of empty chairs, and it was great. Lots of chatting. Seth Erre, though, nowhere to be found. So
he just took off.
Yeah, once he got the first trick-or-treater who was a little kid in a T-Rex costume, and then a couple of princesses, and then there was a gap because there isn't a set time. Right. It's just as you will. And so you're out there for 2 or 3 hours. And Seth was like, nope, unless it's a constant stream, I'm not interested. So he gone. But it was great. And Justy was asleep because she was tired after school. So I was just out representing. I was representing Jesus and Erre household.
There you go.
Yeah, it was great. Speaking of not great, this week in Christian Nationalism.
We still need a theme song for that.
No, it's not even worthy of a theme song. It's just so dumb. And thank you for the encouragement to keep talking about it because we're gonna. The term pastor is it's thrown around loosely these days. And it's no coincidence that pastor and bastard sort of sound similar. So
there's the pull quote.
So we have Christian pastors, fishing for clicks. At least one of these guys I know indirectly, and this guy's he will tweet anything to get attention. It's just that gnarly. I don't even know if he believes it. It's just whatever he can do to get attention. So I'm not even going to mention his name. He's just ridiculous. The issue is that so this guy and another quote bastard came out and after this Muslim mayor, this communist socialist won in New York, people were losing their minds. And I've gotten asked several times, I don't know anything about this person, and I don't know, and I kind of don't care what New York does, to be honest.
People in Kentucky do that. Did you see that, or was it Arkansas?
Yeah, no, it was Kentucky.
Yeah,
yeah. People were trying to vote in Kentucky against.
We're not voting today, guys, and you can't vote for the New York mayor.
Yeah. But our country's under threat, and who knows? Maybe it is. The point, however, is that some pastors took the occasion of the election of that individual to reflect on the fact that none of this would be possible if women weren't voting. And so the answer to society's ills is the removal of and repeal of the 19th Amendment that granted women the right to vote. Because, and this dude, can't stand him. God bless him, and God loves him. Goes on to make the case that the atrocities of abortion and the redefinition of marriage and gender, all the Democratic candidates, all of that has been should be laid at the feet of women who voted. Mm-hmm. And so the natural consequence is that women shouldn't be voting. And so in the name of Jesus, let's restrict women voting and go back to just one vote per household. And that household then is led, of course, by men. And so it's just great. So we're just naming it and saying silly. But here's the point, that the more these things get said, it's like this Nick Fuentes guy who evidently was on, I have no idea who this is. I don't care. But evidently there are these conservative organizations there's a civil war around platforming this dude. Do you know anything about that, Stafford? Yeah. Or do you want to add context for this? I just want to make a point though. Okay. The point, that the sophisticated point behind some of these nonsensical things that are being said is that they keep expanding the permission structures of our society. In other words, what can you get away with saying or doing without any ramifications? That's a permission structure. And so the more Nazi ideas get platformed, even though they seem so absurd, or repeal the 19th Amendment, the permission structure that governs sort of our societal agreement about what's permitted and what's not, that gets pushed wider and wider and wider. Now, you can say there are loads of things on the other side around gender and 70 genders and all the things. I got that. But on this is carrying the banner of Christian, because then this little Nick Fuentes dude, it's Christ is King, is in the bio, and these other two dudes repealing the 19th. It's like these so-called Christians are kind of expanding the permission structures, and that's really the deep concern. Is that the more these things get publicized and are accepted as a plausible view without any ramifications. And I'm not talking about freedom of speech. I'm just talking about basic fact checking and basic like Christian theology and doctrine. Then our society just gets further and further eroded until you can pretty much, and I don't know if we're at that place now, but we're close. So this week in Christian Nationalism is sponsored to you by the 19th Amendment. And we just want to note how asinine these arguments are. The problem is, and I'm sure there's a lot of bots who are cheering this stuff on, but I think there are also real people who deeply believe these sorts of things. And so they have to be spoken against.
There's quite a few white male pastors online that are towing the same line.
Yeah. And it's just, it goes back to what we understand Christian nationalism to be. And that is going to segue into a book review by the late Tim Keller. I was very much a fan of Mr. Keller. I would disagree with him on some reformed sort of stuff. And I'm sure if we ever had a conversation, he's so much smarter than I am that he would dominate my ass. But to speak just rhetorically, I don't know. We can get that out of there. I don't know. I don't even know what that means. He would never do that. Anyway, Tim Keller's name is being evoked in a lot of these discussions. And I read an old review of him before he had died of a book that we had mentioned. It was published in 2020. It was called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. It was one of the first sociological treatments of this subject, written by Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead. And we, back in that day, went through this pretty dramatically. But I thought, in light of our little bitty sessions about talking about what this is and how it violates basic Christianity, this might be a good thing to review. So I'm reading from Keller's review of this book. All right. And I find it really, really helpful. So Keller is going to quote part of this book in his early things, and then he's going to talk about Christian nationalism here later. First, Christian nationalism, and there are many versions and varieties of this. It's an umbrella term, but it's a fusion of American identity with the following elements: with Christianity, preferably Protestantism; with race, white; with nativity, born in the United States; and with political ideology, social and fiscal conservatism. And what isn't added here is with gender, male. I would add that as something that's not on that list. So it's a fusion of American identity with, number one, Protestant Christianity; number two, race, white; number three, nativity, being born in the United States; and political ideology, social and fiscal conservatism. And then I would add with gender, male kind of supremacy. It is a view that you cannot be a real American if you are a Muslim or a Jew, an immigrant or a non-white Christian, or even a political liberal. Christian nationalists believe that the federal government should declare the U.S. to be a Christian nation, put Christian values into law, and allow the public display of Christian symbols and the offering of Christian prayer in public spaces. So, for example, Christian nationalists would be happy to have new churches constructed in their community, but would be opposed to the construction of new mosques. And that's that definition tied with this bit here. There's a theological point I want to make out of this. Second, this is Keller quoting these two authors: it is based on a particular understanding of American history. In this view, the United States was established as an overtly Christian nation and therefore has an almost covenantal relationship with God. Today, this narrative goes on. The left and non-believers are trying to turn America into a secular relativistic nation. Unless we turn back to God and elect officials who will honor God, he will stop blessing America. Now, this I think is a really, really important point for those of us who are aware of this and trying to resist it. Notice that both of these first 2 points find parallels in the Mosaic covenant. Mm-hmm. All right. So my argument is that Christian nationalists are trying to introduce a version of the Mosaic covenant back into Christianity. And for many different reasons, this is extremely problematic, but it also explains their use of the Bible. So let's review what the Mosaic covenant was. The Mosaic covenant was after the nation of Israel had been enslaved in Egypt. God delivers them through miraculous signs and wonders, demonstrating his sovereignty over the gods of Egypt. He takes them into the wilderness. He doesn't take the short route. He takes them into the wilderness, demonstrates his goodness, his tenderness, his provision for them, and then brings them to Mount Sinai, where they perform a wedding ceremony. And this wedding ceremony also takes the form, as it's recorded, as a suzerain treaty. Now, a suzerain treaty was a form of ancient Near Eastern treaty between vassals and kings, where the vassals had responsibilities for allegiance and tribute and loyalty. The kings had responsibility for protection and general provision. If you read the book of Deuteronomy and then compare the elements of Deuteronomy to ancient suzerain treaties, they line up. So the Mosaic covenant was an agreement that God made that was conditional. Now, this is different than the Abrahamic covenant, which was non-conditional, right? I will just make you into a great nation. Or the Noahic covenant, which I will no longer ever flood the world again. Or the Davidic covenant, there will be a person on the throne of David forever. The Mosaic covenant was conditional in one very important respect. You could stay in the land if you obeyed and honored Yahweh, and you would be kicked out of the land if you didn't. And the Mosaic covenant fundamentally was made primarily, well, no, not primarily, but exclusively with the ethnic nation of Israel, which wasn't even a nation at this point, a confederation of tribes built around an ethnic identity that primarily ran through the men, because only the men were circumcised as a mark of the Abrahamic covenant. So the Mosaic covenant was made to family units regarding a nation that wasn't truly a nation yet, but was a confederation. At least it was an ethnicity. It was an ethnicity of native-born Israelites, and it dealt with their economic, political, military security. And the promise of adherence to the covenant was the land would be theirs and they would live in rest. And if they didn't adhere to the covenant, they would not live in rest and they would be exiled to the nations. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
So when Christian nationalists want to argue that American identity is fused together with Christianity and with race, nativity, and political ideology, this has echoes in the Mosaic covenant, right? Because it was with a race and it was with an ethnic identity and certainly represented a political ideology that came from Yahweh. But you get the general idea, like there are echoes here of this. And then you combine that with the idea that in the Christian nationalist understanding, not all of them, but some of them, and some of the most vocal ones, see America as a renewed Israel and the goal of obedience to Christ as the mechanism through which America is renewed, because we're in a form of exile now, right? You get straight from the pages of the Old Testament and the beginnings of the New Testament the idea that we need to renew that sort of covenant with God that God made with America initially, even though it wasn't a treaty covenant or whatever. It was, hey, if we honor him, he'll bless our land. Look, our land's been blessed, so we've honored him. It's not being blessed now because we haven't honored him, so going back to honoring him is the way to renew America and make it great again. This is all Mosaic covenant stuff. This was the argument of the Pharisees. That's the thing that's so fascinating to me, is that the Pharisees looked around and they had the same goals as Jesus, the renewal of Israel. But what they saw were the problems were the presence of unworthy people, the Amha Aretz, the people of the land, and the sinners not being a religious category, but a social category for all of those who did not agree with the program of holiness for the Pharisee. They looked around and saw the presence of sinners and people of the land, and they realized, well, listen, if God is going to eject Rome from our promised land, then because our disobedience got us into this problem, our obedience is going to be the solution. So the heavy-handed coercion of obedience to normal Israelites, for instance, in taking the priestly requirements around dining and applying them to Joe and Janet Israelite, like that was onerous. You know, the Sabbath laws from the oral tradition. I mean, all of this was like burdensome. And so Jesus comes and resists it. But the point is that when you read a lot of the prophetic writings from the Old Testament and the calls to renew Israel, and then you combine that with the Pharisees' project of we just got to make the people more religious or holy, you get a lot of the tone and intonation and subject matter of the Christian nationalists. It's that same. And so they quote from the parts of the Bible that line up totally with that. And so theologically, this is a big freaking deal. It's going backwards in the program of God, right? Because the new covenant, as we'll talk about and have, is new covenant is not with an ethnic people, a nation state, or a certain religious or tribal background. The new covenant has nothing to do with the renewal of land or the blessing of a nation. The new covenant is based on baptism, not circumcision. So it's men and women, Jew or Greek, slave or free, right? And so this is the unwinding of the work of Christ in the name of Christ in really significant exegetical ways that are bringing great harm to the name of Jesus and to real people in the world. So that was a riff off the top of my head on Keller riffing on Whitehead and Perry. All right? The third thing he wants to say, and we're gonna tag a little article onto this point in a second. Christian nationalism is implicitly and sometimes explicitly committed to a specific social order in which the old hierarchies, like native born over foreigners, men over women, Christians over Jews and Muslims, whites over non-whites, are reasserted and strengthened.
Yep.
Oh, it's the undoing of the work of Christ. Let me read that again. That is such a freaking big deal. And this gets into the 19th Amendment thing. Like this is like, we're looking at examples of this. Christian nationalism is implicitly and sometimes explicitly committed to a specific social order in which the old hierarchies, native born over foreigners, men over women, Christians over Jews and Muslims, whites over non-whites, are reasserted and strengthened. And here you see all the isms, right? The terrorizing of immigrants, the blaming of women for policies, political policies that we don't like, right? That Christians should be privileged in religious liberty over Jews and Muslims. And that white supremacy is winked at, nodded to, and given permission in a lot of the language and the imagery of this administration. And so, bro, like this is full on red alert. Like there have been loads of idolatry before, but my word, this is significant. And so we have to just keep being aware of what it is, aware of what it represents, and aware of how to best resist.
Yeah, 100%. I was thinking yesterday, like is this the worst time period? No, we had time periods where humans owned other humans and this kind of stuff. But the difference is, at least on the top surface level, is that we can continue to grow from those things, like away from those things. So there was bad time periods, or we're constantly trying to evolve forward to a more healthy environment for human beings. This is a time period where we're like really trying to devolve, like to go backwards. And that, so it's like, is this the worst? No, obviously there's been worse time periods in human history, but this is one particular time where a large swath of people are trying to push us backwards and take away the progress that was made.
And they're doing it with a theological system that denies the work of Christ in Christ's name.
In his name, yeah.
Yeah, that's the coup de grace, my friend.
But I think that illustrates why it's so important to keep talking about this and keep it in the forefront, is because we're watching day by day. Like I was thinking about the other morning when, like, I get everybody to school, I have a cup of coffee, and unfortunately some Eggos if they happen to be in the fridge.
Mini
and
Eggos.
I'll watch just like the 10-minute
Eggos.
clip of Jimmy Kimmel from the night before on YouTube, and it's crazy how there's enough for him to talk about every single day. Like there's a new something every single day. He's got enough in his 10-minute monologue to highlight a lot of crazy things. I was like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
every day
Yeah.
for a year.
And yes, and we could go down that road of just the continual criticism of the insanity we're seeing from the current administration. But I think our lane is the theological foundation
Mm-hmm.
that's being promoted, and the importance of the church and individuals in the church to counter witness to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like there's a place for satire, and there's a place for that. I don't know, just straight up mockery, because it's nonsense. It's insanity, is what it is. But I don't think that's our role.
No, but that marriage between the two with how much is happening on a daily basis, then
For
baptizing
sure.
it.
Yes.
Because it's hard to
Yes.
argue with, if you're just Joe Christian out in whatever Midwest state, when the president says something crazy and there's like ordained by God,
Yes.
it changes the way in which people respond to it.
Yes. Exactly right. Exactly right. I want to just go over Keller's conclusions, which I think are great. About after he reviewed the book, he's like, so what's wrong with this? Not the book, but what the book's critiquing. First, he said, we can love our country, but we must, all caps, and that's Keller screaming, right? Which he never does.
Yeah.
But we must look to biblical theology for our attitude to any nation and its heritage, including America. Now, I would state this differently, but Tim's smarter than I am, so we're going to go with him. The New Testament makes it clear that since the coming of Christ, racial and ethnic barriers are set aside. We can and should love our country and its distinctives and be proud of its accomplishments. But if we can be proud of its accomplishments, we must also be ashamed for its sins and failures to live up to its ideals. Every nation made up of sinners will have great moral wrongdoing and evil in its past. To hide or minimize that past is to take a major step toward idolatry and to reject God's righteous judgment on our sins. I would state that differently, but that's exactly right. That's exactly right. God is no longer working his redemptive purposes in the world through one favored nation or race. That is the fundamental premise of the church right there. Right there. Secondly, he says, we must recognize that Christian nationalism in its most pure form, and I don't know what he means by this, I would say in all of its forms, is indeed idolatrous. It looks to political power as the thing that will truly save us and identifies a particular set of social policies as the Christian view, and all others are not just mistaken, but evil heresies. It assumes that America now has replaced Israel as the chosen people and the world's redeemer nation. It is true that these ideas are not usually stated out loud. Well, not more and more, but they dominate the movement as unspoken assumptions and unquestionable givens, and they must be rejected as unbiblical and idolatrous. Third, we must be prepared that if we oppose Christian nationalism, especially from inside the church, we may be branded a Marxist or communist.
What?
Yes. And let me just say now, we've been called worse.
That's true.
By better people. Fourth, to the degree that it is influential, Christian nationalism means the death of Christian witness. The ethos of Christian nationalism is not in any way to try to persuade, win over, or evangelize their opponents. Their attitude towards unbelievers is they are evil, and what does their opinion matter? Sure, they hate you, just hate them right back. Own the libs. The motivation of witness, a desire to see all people come to know Christ, has been completely eradicated. And all that's left is coercive power. Tim Keller, from the top rope.
That line right there at the beginning of that last little piece with that we're looking to like this kind of political power to save us as Christians shows, I feel like that really highlights the foundational difference between what Jesus was advocating for and where we've landed.
But think about, I mean, it's both sides, right? Because now political power is going to save us from Trump. And so after the elections on this past Tuesday, my timeline was I try to have a very curated, balanced sort of timeline, but there was a whole heck of a lot of crowing and rejoicing about saving our country from the people trying to save our country. And I was wondering, at what point does the same idolatry manifest itself with political power is going to save us, and we have to save our country from the people trying to save our country, right? And so it's the same error, just the opposite direction. And that's why we're always talking about, listen, we don't want to replace dogma with new dogma. We want to move from beyond the gift shop into the larger world. Well, so too with political idolatry. The answer to bad political idolatry isn't more political idolatry, right? The answers are embodied communities presenting a completely different set of values, priorities, and narratives to the world that neither left or right can accommodate for.
Right. I think the biggest difference is that the rejoicing wasn't being baptized as the liberal version of Jesus is coming to save. It was just like, hey, we can kind of halt some of this deconstruction that's happening from the top level down. What is interesting, though, is to see, not to reference Kimmel again, but I'm going to reference Kimmel again. His response to the SNAP thing was he started a huge food donation thing on their lot. And so he's just like, in that way, I think he's doing what you're saying is like, he's organizing the community in LA, and a ton of people brought in food and diapers and supplies. And it's like, hey, he comments like, this is terrible how this is happening, but we're not just going to sit here and complain about it. We are going to organize ourselves to be a stopgap. So I think seeing more of that, I mean, just because a few Democratic governors won, or mayors and governors won in random states, doesn't really change much. There's still a lot of people that are in a ton of need. And so going and kind of meeting that need. And I know that all the food closets in this area are all stepping up pretty big and requesting extra
us too
donations,
our church
to be there. And I love that.
That's right.
That's the Mr. Rogers thing again, seeing the people that are helping in the time of crisis. Like, there are a lot of people who are getting their hands in the dirt rather than, wringing them in the air. So I think that's encouraging to see.
It's very encouraging. Very encouraging. We're 32 minutes and we haven't even approached prayer yet. I had a couple other things. I don't know. You tell me, Tim.
Do you know who we report to?
Jesus?
Yeah, I don't think he minds.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is a Substack article by J. Mallow, Mallow. Do you know him?
It's quite a
you know who this is?
Sounds like a hip hop name.
J. Mallow. And he wrote an article around, or a Substack around this third point of Keller's, which is the hierarchies are now being reintroduced. And the point of his Substack, and the reason it caught my attention, is that a lot.
Did he write this in 2020, or is this more current?
This is a 2025er. This is on October 23.
Current response to Keller's 2020.
No, sorry. So Keller's third point around the commitment to hierarchy, reintroducing hierarchy. I had read that, and then I had found this unrelated Substack.
Got it.
Because one of the things I've noticed, and we did this, I think, last episode, or we did it after the No Kings protest, is that you're not opposing Trump, you're opposing God. Right. That the truth is, and remember we read this, the truth is it's Jesus who is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And this guy, Jay Fallow, no, is it Mallow? Mallow, sorry. I was getting...
It's not Jimmy Fallon.
No, dang it. Jay Mallow, I almost called him Fallow again. Jay Mallow was pointing out how this little phrase, Christ the King, it functions in Christian nationalist circles as a reinforcement of hierarchy.
Yeah.
So he was so I thought that was super interesting because I not a lot, but all of the Christian nationalists I see on X, Twitter, I will often go and just see what their bio says. And Christ is King will be a very prominent piece of their bio. And his point is it carries authoritarian freight. Remember, we talked about the Bible being used for authoritarian versus authoritative. And so he's reflecting on the No Kings protest and how much the Christians, John Thune, Mike Johnson, and Carolyn Levitt, these are all born-again Christians, self-proclaimed, who were just straight up lying about the reason people were gathering. And he was talking about, are these people doing this to just reassure the MAGA base that their ideology is still true, that no one is opposing them and they're killing it everywhere? Or are they literally just doing this for Donald Trump because he's watching and paying attention? And anyway, so he then goes into the idea that these Christians are functioning in ways that enable Donald Trump. They give him more and more permission to do whatever malicious impulse is sort of in his heart by saying things like, "Hey, look at these 7 million people. They're just Hamas, anti-American." And Trump is just going to receive that and be just fine. And so he's wondering about the ideology that sits behind these Christians. John Thune, at least, was from Biola, that are kind of enabling all of this. Mike Johnson not knowing anything that is happening in the world that's negative. And
they spun the No Kings thing too to make it specifically anti-Christian. They'd say Christ is
that's
king.
it.
Look at all these people out here saying there is no king.
Yes, they're not. Remember that we read that guy, that Virgil guy, who I got. Someone texted me and said they know him. We weren't revolting against an earthly king; we were revolting against our heavenly king. And so he's reflecting on the congruence of all of this about what does it mean to say Christ is king, and how that kind of narrative works to undergird Keller's third point about, the reintroducing of these old hierarchies. And he had a couple of choice quotes that I just wanted to pull out. He said, Christ is king explicitly supports a narrative that a true democracy is failed and is a failed and even unbiblical idea. A true democracy where you live in a plurality of differing groups with differing interests is a failed and even unbiblical idea because Christ is king. The notion, and I'm quoting him here, the notion that Christ is king embraces the idea that the world and even nature itself is set up in an authoritarian hierarchy. The implication is that Christ, and he adds a parenthesis, it's significant they don't use Jesus' name. The significance that Christ is divinely sovereign, and that fact demands submission even from unbelievers. The logic goes that because Christ has allowed us, always white men, to be in positions of power, therefore he blesses whatever we do, and everyone else's responsibility is submit to us as you would submit to God. And this explicitly was made at the Charlie Kirk Memorial. We looked at several speeches that made that line. What is dangerous about this narrative is the suggestion that the very things that have defined what America always has been aren't considered godly any longer. For the Christ is King crowd, democratic outcomes are only valid when they are favored. Which I thought was really, really interesting. The idea is that only those submitted to God using their rights correctly have any right to the term Christ is King. And so these permission structures are intended to not only dehumanize people, but to make them both un-American and anti-Christian. This not so subtle move that is being made is to make support for Trump intrinsically American and therefore necessarily Christian. Wow. I was like, that's it. That's it. we're just beginning to see how these threads sort of weave together and operate in unison. And I was like, okay, so I think he's really onto something there with that Christ is King motif. That because Christ is King, we don't have to respect other viewpoints, acknowledge truth, be sensitive to people who might disagree, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, that's this week in Christian Nationalism, a 40-minute segment that I had pegged for like 12 minutes.
So real quick, before you segue, or maybe this can be the segue.
Segue!
What I think is important with every time we do this segment is just like a little reminder of how to posture in all of this each week. So as we talked about with prayer last week, there is a lot to be said about what it means to kind of come before God in the morning or whatever, and just kind of align yourself with what's happening and what that connection in prayer does to kind of refocus you to what God is doing, or what God's plan or movement might be in this time with a lot of this stuff. Like what else? Like how out? Like I even talked to a student about this the other day. Like getting into the Gospels or the Sermon on the Mount again, to reiterate what you said, starting in Matthew and just taking notes and writing down questions and all that kind of stuff. But really sitting in a lot of that stuff and writing a bunch of questions or frustrations or whatever in the margins of the Bible, and just say, I don't get this, I don't understand this, but I'll come back to this again, and seeing what God is saying about how to coexist amongst other people on this planet. Like, I think that it's one thing to raise the red flag and to continue to like acknowledge the insanity that's happening. And to do this in the way in which, as we've heard from so many people, that we're not alone in feeling crazy or whatever else. But then the next step is how do you posture and turn back towards the center in your immediate community on a daily basis, so that you don't lose your mind, so that you don't become militant or angry in the way that you respond to things. That's it.
Is that a statement?
Well, I think so. I mean, that's what I am personally trying to wrestle with on a daily basis.
Okay.
I can overwhelm myself completely with everything that's going on. Or I can go help gather food items for the folks like we talked about for the food kitchens and whatnot. Or I can figure out ways in which I can serve and be a hand of good in this time, and try to come in line with what I think God is looking for, right? We've talked about how God can do good things even through evil circumstances. And I read something really interesting on that recently, but I can't remember exactly, so I don't want to misquote it. But the way in which good things, no matter where they come from, are according to God's will. And even sometimes bad things that are done by godly people are not necessarily. And there's this whole long article kind of picking apart the theology of what that looks like. I'm trying on a daily basis to encourage myself by doing prayer the way we're talking about, which is a struggle for me, and looking for ways to serve or to see people doing good and to highlight that good. So that has been, I feel like that's the tangible 3-dimensional response, at least for me, to what we're seeing and hearing. And so I just want to encourage everybody every time we do this to be like, hey, there's one thing, tangible ways.
There's one thing you have not mentioned, though, that is a central part of your response.
I don't know what it
one
is.
Thing. Yeah, you do.
Punk rock.
Yes! Punk rock is the closest thing we have to communal laments. And I am convinced, so I am knee-deep in Lamentation. So I've never studied the book of Lamentations. We're in the middle of Jeremiah at our church. Jeremiah, not a popular book, talking about idolatry this week's glorious. I mean, it's pulling up all this stuff in our community. It's fantastic. But then we're going to do Lamentations for Advent. And Lamentations is gnarly, bro. It's gnarly. I mean, there's a reason why no one preaches it. It is.
You guys are doing it for Advent.
Absolutely.
Love it.
But the more I dive into Lamentations, but even Jeremiah's lamenting over in Jeremiah, 40 years of lamenting over what's about to happen. And I'm studying more broadly the idea of lament. I am convinced that's the only mentally and spiritually safe path forward, is learning to lament. And because, I mean, and we can do a whole thing on this if we want. So I meet with these pastors. We're going to meet when this episode comes out. We're going to meet that night, and we're going to talk about lament. It's one of the prophetic postures of the ancient prophets when Israel felt exceptional and safe in their, hey, we've got the temple, we've got a son on the throne from the line of David, and we've got God's presence, so we can kind of do whatever we want. And one of the things the prophets did is they led in like group lamenting. So when you do the broods thing, yeah, like that's a corporate lament that keeps you healthy and sane. And I just want to suggest to our listeners that we start lamenting. And lamenting, there are so many ways to understand laments, but lament is different than complaint. Complaint questions the covenantal nature of God. Lament assumes it. So lament is driven by the separation between the experienced reality of God's people and God's nature and goodness and his covenantal promises. That's what drives lament, is that mismatch between what we're experiencing and what we're proclaiming is true of God. And lament pierces through denial, because it's not lament unless it's telling the truth in an unvarnished way. Lament, So the Lamentations, I mean, it's gnarly. God doesn't speak throughout the whole book, and God is accused of the most atrocious things. Essentially Yahweh has allowed Jerusalem to be raped. Mothers are eating their children for food. I mean, it's brutal. And God doesn't correct. He doesn't rebuke. He doesn't speak. He lets the human emotion have the priority, which has really interesting implications, because those imperfect words to God are now part of God's words to us. And so the permission structure is wide when it comes to the things that you can say and feel in the presence of Almighty God. And so I'm convinced that lamenting both individually and corporately. So here's a dumb one I wrote. This is based off an old Stone Temple Pilots lyric. And I hesitate even reading it, but I want to give just examples of what lament kind of looks like. This is even addressed to God. It's addressed to certain consumers of television and certain media, uncritical media consumption. And so I've called it Venom. Oh, to you, you nation of pathetic sleepwalkers, so content to drown in your own rancid apathy, that you allow your cynical offspring access to every depravity known to man, while being sold the lies by swarthy old auctioneers who have brainwashed the masses to cold indifference. So there will be no reason to set another place at the table tonight, honey, since vacuity is on the menu, live and direct through our MFing brand new state-of-the-art home entertainment system. Could you please pass the remote?
Love it.
I know you would love it. I know. I'm trying. I needed to establish my punk rock credentials.
Well, think about it through, like, it's hard not to hear everything you just said and not think about the he is risen indeed. Because what is that? It's acknowledging that covenant while lamenting the chaos around and
totally,
saying, hey, we're leaning into this, but this sucks.
Yes.
And same thing with like the prayers of the people, like acknowledging in prayer things that are going awry, and then but in saying Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, you're acknowledging the covenant in the lamentation.
That's right.
And so all those things line up. And the same, I mean, if you're ever in a punk show and you're caught up in the energy of the crowd and the prophetic nature of what it's lamenting or commenting on or naming, it is that way. Like, it's absolutely, there's a joy in the collision of bodies in that small space, there's
Yeah.
a joy in that. I mean, it's the joy of non-compliance. Like that
Yeah.
Idol's
Yeah.
second record is called Joy as an Act of Resistance. And it's a
Mm.
great record
Oh,
if no one has
dang,
listened
dude.
to it.
Well, I feel like this is a more general cultural comment. I feel like the two places where the people of God should pay attention are musicians, certain musicians, punk rock being one genre of musician, and comedians. There are certain comedians that I think are like fulfilling a prophetic role
Mm-hmm.
in our world. For you, it's Kimmel. I shouldn't say this, but you know what? Bill Burr.
I love Bill Burr.
I know. I mean, sometimes is some of the most vulgar, and I skip it. And obviously, you know, as a Christian man, I don't sanction his language, blah, blah, blah. But dude, he did in the middle of a comedy special, he did a riff on abortion that was ridiculously good.
Yeah.
And I was like, my goodness. So I think there are places in culture that still function prophetically.
Mm-hmm.
But my point in reading my dumb poem, which I don't think is very good, and I don't commend it at all, other than to say there's something about the writing of that, or the praying of that, or
Absolutely.
the expressing of that, whatever, in a covenant context that channels it away from me making enemies of everybody by name or whatever. And it just redirects that plea to God for him to intervene. And so I just think personally that and one of the things we're going to talk about with the pastors is that's the way forward. That has to be the way forward, because even acknowledging our tribal affiliations, let's acknowledge those. There is so much to lament that we can agree on. I mean, one of the things I wanted to talk about today that I was going to skip is just what ICE has been up to. We haven't talked about customs enforcement and ICE agents. And, you know, there are a couple of videos that are, and again, I know we don't have all the context. I got it that they're clipped. But when there's a guy having a seizure in the front seat, hanging on to his toddler, and ICE agents are all around trying to rip the toddler out of his hand. And I mean, you're just like, no, or the invasion of a preschool.
Yeah, I'm not sure what context you need for most of those.
I just am like, this, it just hurts my heart so badly that the permission structures have widened so that, you know, and then the head of the border agent the head of the Chicago thing was just found liable in court for lying about many of the things, the so-called justifications of. And so I feel like laments for justice are just so critical now.
Yeah.
100%.
100%.
And it's, yeah. And so, you know, one of the things the Lord's Prayer doesn't cover is lament. It assumes evil, protect us from evil, keep us from evil and temptation. So it assumes the context, but it doesn't name it. But Jesus laments all the time throughout the Gospels. When he starts with Psalm 22 on the cross, why have you forsaken me? That's a lament song. You know, or when he's weeping over Jerusalem, just like Jeremiah wept over the city. Like that's lamenting.
That would be an interesting series, a lamentation one. But even with those things, because that kind of hits at some of the Gethsemane stuff that I've always struggled with. But some of those prayers are exactly that. How do you do that? And I think that what you said is really important for everybody. I'm going to hold on to the difference between complaint and lament, because there is a line between those two, and it's really easy to fall on the complaint side rather than the lament side. And what those two things ask of you is very different.
Oh, that's so good, Tim. Yes.
Well, it is.
Yes.
And you just illustrated that, but I think it's if there's a takeaway in this little section, I think that's the key thing is there is a difference between the two and how we posture ourselves in expressing what we see is important.
That's right.
It's not just important for how God moves. It's important for your psyche. It's important for your soul. Like the way in which you acknowledge evil and how it infects you and how it can't just infect you by letting it in. It can infect you by letting it have power, or I'm not sure how to phrase that, but do you know what I mean? Like it's just, in complaining, you can descend back into the very thing that you're pushing against, rather than acknowledging it, but holding that covenant, looking forward, looking up, or however you want to phrase that.
Yeah.
It's a big distinction.
It is. Because you can look at the evil in the world and go, well, I mean, obviously God's not real. But then you can look at the evil.
I hear that every day.
I hear that every day. Absolutely. And then you can look at the evil in the world and wonder, why do we protest against it so much? And, see image bearing, even in our protestations against it. And for me, it makes it far more acute to say, hey, there's a good God who could stop it.
Well, and all the evil that we're seeing currently in our current day and age is about, really, you can look at it and all the different struggles we're seeing right now is about one group, and it's a different group in all the different struggles. I'm not labeling one group, but it's always one group dehumanizing another. Yes. So whether it's about taking over land, or it's saying that you don't belong here, or you shouldn't be voting, all that stuff is one group dehumanizing another group. And so if I participate in the dehumanization as a response, well, then the battle's lost.
Well, that's one of the questions.
Capitulated it.
That's it. And that's the surest sign of idolatry. In the Old Testament, the surest sign of idolatry is the oppression and dehumanizing of some group. And so as we reflect on idolatry this weekend, it's going to be like, okay, so where are we tempted to dehumanize people?
Yeah.
And trace that back. Where are we afraid? And trace that back. What do we turn to when we're afraid for comfort? And walk that back. And so, idolatry turns out to be this thing that, we're not just images of wood and stone, but the political idolatry is just corrupt. It's corrupt everywhere. It's just corrupted the church completely, at least in my branch in the Americas. So I'm so with you. Let me make one prayer point. Because we're 57 minutes, so giddy up. Because last episode we talked about it is possible for human wills to resist God. And we gave examples of that, and even from Hebrews, just the idea that we don't currently see Jesus of Nazareth manifest as King of the universe. But there are also spiritual wills that oppose God. And so just a quick meditation on Daniel 10, which, we've talked about before, but it still blows my mind, and I don't know what to do with it other than Jesus took the Old Testament seriously, so I have to. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of that message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. So he's seeking to understand this vision that he has. And for 3 weeks, he's waiting upon God to show him the meaning of this vision. An angel shows up and says, "Do not be afraid, Daniel." They always have to say that. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, 3 weeks ago, your words were heard, and I came in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me for 21 days. So the prince here is an archon in Greek. It's obviously this was not written in Greek, but in the Septuagint, which was a Greek translation of the Hebrew, archon is a ruler over a region. When Jesus calls Satan the prince of this world, that's the word archon. And so we're meeting a spiritual being who oversees a region. And we've talked a little bit about this before, about a thread throughout the Old Testament is that spiritual beings were given authority over nations. Anyway, the prince of the Persian Empire resisted me for 21 days. So you've been waiting 3 weeks for an answer. I was dispatched right away, but for 3 weeks have been in some sort of battle. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now, he does not mean the physical king of Persia. He means this ruler. Yeah. Now I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. And so he explains the vision, And then he said, you know why I have come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. No freaking idea what any of that means. Except Jesus and Paul give weight to this worldview. So there are spiritual beings that oppose the work of God. So it's not just a human obstinacy, but there are spiritual beings that resist the work of God. And so Greg Boyd makes a lot of this in God at War way back in the day, but he says, we're praying in a war zone. There's a cosmic war that's going on. We partner with God to bring about his will on earth as it is in heaven, but there are forces that resist that. Prayer isn't magic, and prayer isn't a genie. Prayer is warfare when we are laboring with God to resist forces of evil to bring about his will on earth as it is in heaven. Prayer is a form of social and spiritual revolt, and that is why we pray persistently. I don't know if I agree with all this, but it's an interesting thought. He says, if it were only a matter of God saying yes or no, then it wouldn't make sense to ask him more than once. That's interesting because Paul asked 3 times for the thorn to be removed. Not because God is not stingy or wants us to beg him. It's because we are laboring against people and forces that have genuine say-so, and that labor takes persistence. I have no idea. No, I know. I don't know. So week 1, why pray if God is if it's all written? Nope, it's not all written. God knows the end from the beginning, but he's created free agents that can resist his will. And in that context, prayer actually works. Oh, okay. So that's like big point number 2. Big point number 3 is you can only influence through prayer. You can't determine and coerce because there are also spiritual forces at work. Now, there's one very simple point to be made from this. Even if we don't get it, understand it, or buy it. I buy it, but I don't understand it. And that point is we simply cannot ever say the moral calculus involved and why seemingly some prayers are answered and others aren't. We can never, ever affirm why they weren't or they were. That is spiritual malpractice, and the Bible presents such a more complicated picture of how prayer works than just that.
Yeah.
That's the point. And so to say that God's will is already done on earth and that things happening to us that are bad are God's will, think about how much of the Bible then doesn't make sense. It means existentially that God is doing this to me. My kid died, God did this to me, right? My addiction, God did this to me. The rapes in warfare, God was doing that for his glory. But then why would I ever ask for help? Why even have a thing like prayer to begin with? If it just was it's just an empty rehearsal. Like, why would you what kind of cruel God would do that? Right? Encourage us to ask him that our wills be done, but with him just going, no, I'm going to do whatever I want anyway. And then why would we ever lament? Because shouldn't we be receiving? Shouldn't everything that happened in the world, if it's all God's will, shouldn't it all be met with praise for God's glory? There's some lesson I'm going to learn because Seth has Down syndrome. And not only that, but then where do demons fit? Demons then are just other instruments of God's will, right? And certainly you there are partial glimpses of that in the Old
souls
Testament.
Of the Nephilim.
Oh boy. But then if God's will is being done already on earth, Jesus would be fighting against the Father by reversing healings and giving his disciples authority to heal and cast out demons. Why would God call us to repent if all that is happening is already his will? And then why would God command us to be obedient? I mean, all of this assumes we have real say-so in the world. And if that's true, then our praying can't be coercive. God isn't going to override the free will of a moral agent to bring someone to Jesus, but God influences, and we participate in that influence. And so, I just think the reason
grenade at the end here.
the reason there is evil in the world is because God chose to make image bearers. That's the reason. If he made something else, we would have an entirely different moral universe. But because image bearers, to bear God's image, mean that we have real power, real say-so, real agency in the world to affect the world. And God tied the effectiveness of humans to the effectiveness of the creative order. This is why there's evil. And so, to simply say, and this is the big point, bro, and let's end it here, all right? When you pray, the big problem, you brought up Gethsemane, the massive problem with praying the Gethsemane prayer, where Jesus looks at the Father and says, "Not my will, but yours be done." What I do is I tag that on as an act of surrender. So I'll pray for something I really want, and then I'll kind of critique, well, maybe I don't need it, or maybe it's not worth praying over, or maybe it's selfish or whatever. And then it's kind of this act of piety. I'll say, "But not my will, yours be done." And I think in general, as an act of piety, that's great. We surrender things. We surrender outcomes. I think that's a fine thing. The problem, though, is that we then assume that whatever happens next is God's will. So if I pray that for someone to get healed, we had a woman, 4 kids, all adopted. So they've all been abandoned previously by their families, been adopted into a new family. She gets diagnosed with cancer and 10 months later is dead. We all prayed that she would be healed. All of us, with great gusto, we prayed that she would be healed. If you pray, "But not my will, but yours be done," then the temptation is to think, because she died, that is what God's will was. And what we're saying, the big point on all of this, even though we're going through it very piecemeal, the point is to say that no, not everything that happens is God's will. If you pray for somebody and they die, it's not God's will that they died. That doesn't follow. And in fact, next episode, maybe we'll look at a specific example where Jesus refutes the application of moral logic to some instance of suffering. All right, where Jesus explicitly refutes it. But for now, we just want to say the big point that we're saying is when we pray, and we pray, "God, may your will be done." Whatever happens next, we can't say, particularly if it's a bad thing, that, well, that was just God's will. Oh, God's will, I guess it wasn't God's will to heal her. Right? It's just easy to say that. And I want to say, no. God's will is Genesis 1 and 2, Revelation 21 and 22. God's will is that no one ever got sick. God's will is there are no tears. That's God's will. We're in suboptimum conditions now, baby, where cancer is real and birth defects happen and people get into automobile accidents. And to look and to say, well, there's some sort of moral logic there, man, I just think we're prohibited from doing that. And it's unwise. So that's where this all cashes out, is I can't look at the world and say, oh, that earthquake that happened in that city, that was God's will. Or that death to that woman, that was God's will. Or, hey, that healing that happened, that was God's will. Now, I think in general, we can say God's will is for people to be healed, but maybe it was, as our questioner asked last episode, maybe they were just part of a trial in medication, and that is what brought about the healing. I think God still gets credit for that, but it's not like God looked at that person and said, "You're going to be healed," and looked at somebody else and said, "No, you're not going to be healed." Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. Well, and also, I think again, like I said last week, trying to find congruencies in God's character all the way through. I think all of this is also interesting with the why Jesus had to die and what implications that ties into that, and what role Jesus' death plays in death itself, what death itself is, what God's idea for death in the first place was, how that ties into the not being eternal beings to begin with, but choosing not to embrace that. All that stuff is tied for me through all of this.
Yes.
And so are there other wills at play? It sure seems like it. How does that play into the problem of evil, as you kind of just opened up? And if that is all true, then how do we posture within all in the great narrative of the whole thing?
That's it. And lament,
Very
guess what?
two-dimensional.
Lament's going to be a part of that. All right.
Which makes sense. It makes sense to acknowledge what you see, but to do so leaning into the covenant of hope that you also understand. Like, there's a very specific posture in that, and it's really easy to slip out of that. It's easy to slip into despair. It's easy to slip into anger and complaint and those kind of things. I think it's very interesting. The other players on the field is that's a whole can of worms.
I know, dude. And I don't have much on it. Like, it's just like, I know there's a lot written about it, but
at the same time, even if it would be hard. I would distrust almost anyone's authoritative stance on that topic because of the fact that it's really hard to. But the fact that it is continually referenced at least gives you a foundational understanding that this is happening. Yeah, and in that way, it can change, like you just illustrated, how and why things happen often. Yeah. And like the whole, like, I'm so sorry I got caught up. I was at war with this other spiritual entity over here. It was kind of going sideways for a second. Don't worry about it. Michael showed up. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. And notice the name of the being that showed up. Just notice the one you just said.
Michael. Oh yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sure his name is really Michael too.
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
Matthew
In English.
and Mark and John.
Yeah.
No wonder Christian nationalists are so like locked in.
Oh, well, friends. Golly, yep. I don't know how you title an episode like this.
If only everybody could see our text threads every week of trying to find a new title Lord. Every time.
Seriously. AI does nothing for us on titling. Venom. Anyway, you guys are amazing. Thank you for all the feedback. We are just humbled and blessed to be a part of this. So, to be continued. Bye.
Forever and ever. Thank you for listening to this conversation. The Voxology Podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is made possible by listeners just like you. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology Podcast or on Tithely, tithe.ly, and just search Voxology Podcast. Links for both are in the show notes and on our website. You can interact with the hosts on Facebook /Voxology Podcast or on Instagram at Voxology Podcast and on Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Mike Erre. Thank you for walking this long road with us.